Today we're building these semi-floating shelves. If you can make 6 straight cuts and drive in 12 screws, you too can build them. I'm using solid oak for this project, so I got some 1x12 material. 1x12 measures actually 11¼ inches deep. This is a 48 inch wide plank that we're going to be using, and it's 3/4 inch thick. We got 2 of these. This is about $35 a piece, $70 in lumber here. You're also going to need for your edge banding material, the stuff that wraps around the shelf, another piece of 1x plank. This was a 1x4. Whatever thickness you want your shelf will determine how thick of a piece of wood you want here. If you want it thinner, you can go with a 1x3 or 1x2. Whatever you decide your total thickness will be. I went with this because I wanted a slightly thicker shelf. Another thing that you want to get is a 3/8 dowel. This is an oak dowel. We're going to use this to plug all of our screw holes, give it a little bit of a rustic look. And back here, we've got some scrap pieces of poplar and pine that we're going to be using for the support on the inside. So let's get started. Since I want both pieces cut exactly the same size, what I'm going to do is cut them at the same time by clamping them together. You want to determine the length of your shelf and subtract out your edge banding, which in my case is 1.5 inches, because we're using 3/4 stock. So I am going with 38.5 for my actual shelf material. If you add 1.5 inches to that, with the edge banding that's going to go on both sides, so the total shelf is going to be 40. Now our pieces are cut to length, and we're going with the width that the planks came at, so we don't have to bother with that. So our top piece, this is our bottom. At this point you can determine what side looks best for you to go with. When you're cross-cutting oak like this and you don't want tear out, we've got minimal, if any, tear out, because I used a relatively new blade, 80 teeth per inch, and it gives you a nice clean cut, and it'll do that on both sides. This side is actually slightly better than this one, but you can see they're both very clean because the blade is sharp and it's got a lot of teeth per inch. I'm going to mark my 1x3 here to approximate dimensions to wrap around my oak shelf. So I know this is going to be approximately 12. I'm going to give it a couple more inches. The front piece is going to be 40 inches. I'm going to give myself at least 2 more inches on that side, just so I can kind of throw things together, show you how it'll look. Cut a couple test blocks at 1.5 inches. These are going to fill in the center to support our shelf. It's a little box that we're making, so I want to see if that dimension will allow my side pieces to sit flush. And it looks like that's going to be the right height. So if you're using a 3-inch board out here, 3/4 plus 3/4 for the shelves, minus 1.5 inches, will give you the exact dimension. I know it sounds stupid, but trust me, you always want to cut a test piece, check it to make sure it'll save you a lot of work later on, because this piece might be 3 1/16. You know, it's pretty close to 3, but I cut that test piece. Now my table saw is set, and I know that everything will fit flush. So I set my fence at my 1.5 inch mark. We're going to cut this piece of poplar, which is going to be our ledger board. This is what we're going to attach our shelving to, and this is going to get screwed to the wall. So this will be cut at 1.5 inches. Now I just mark my ledger piece to length and cut it. This is the way the shelf comes together. We're going to take our 1.5 inch pieces that we just ripped down. You can have 2 of them, and one's going to go right against the edge. This is going to go up against the wall. This one's going to go about 1.5 inches away from the front. Your sides are going to come together. Your back's going to come together. You're going to have butt joints here, and then your top piece is going to fit in between the sides, and everything will be nice and flush, just like that. I take some wood glue, and now I'm just applying it to my ledger board, and that's the board that's going to fit up against the edge of the shelf and rest up against the wall. We're going to glue this and then screw it in place. When you line it up, just make sure it's flush with your shelf piece. Throw on a few clamps, and then we'll be ready to screw it in place. Wipe off any glue that squeezes out. Now we're ready to screw it down. Since all of our screw holes are going to be covered up with dowels, I'm going to be really precise where I put them. So they're going to go 1/2 inch out from the edge, and then they're going to be 1 inch away from the ends. So 1/2 inch plus 1 inch. That'll be the point where we're going to drill through and put our little dowel heads, as well as our screws. I'm going to make 3 marks because I'm going to have 3 screws and 3 dowels. 2 of them right next to the edge, 1 inch away, and then the last one is going to be straight in the middle. So it's 1 inch away from the edge by 1/2 inch. And I know the last one is right in the middle. I got 38.5. We're going to drill holes to put in our dowel. Our dowel is just 3/8 oak that we're going to cut down to fit. But my material is 3/4 of an inch thick. So what I want to do is I want to go through half of that material. So I'm just going to mark my tape measure, the halfway point, with a piece of tape. And this will give me my guide as far as how deep I want to drill. And all of the holes I drill for the dowel is going to be that deep. So if you take a look from the side, that's how deep the dowel is going to sit, which will be just about right. So the bit doesn't wander, I'm going to go ahead and use an ice pick or an awl to mark my holes as far as where they're going to start. It gives the bit something to track. Before I drill the 3/8 hole, I'm going to drill a 1/8 inch hole, and this is going to be for my screw to go through as well. Now I use the 3/8 bit. Now I use an 1 5/8 screw that'll go right through everything and hold it all together. Now we just do it 2 more times. Easiest way to measure for the right plug size is put your plug in there and just mark it. Now we're just going to cut the plug on our line. Bit of glue, pour it in your hole. You're going to push your dowel into the hole. And then give it a light tap. If you got a wooden mallet, that works out really well. Just tap it flush to the surface. So we mounted our back support and we put the plugs in. Our front support is going to be a lot easier because no one's going to see it. We're not going to put in any plugs. We're going to put the screws in from the bottom. And I'm going to measure out about 9¼ inches. That's because our pipe brackets are going to be right at the 9¼ inch mark. I'm going to use a countersink bit, drill 4 holes so my screws fit flush. Sits nice and flush. I do that 4 more times. So what we've done so far is just put these 2 support brackets on our piece of oak, put 3 plugs in the front. We got 4 screws holding this top one, 3 in the back. You can go with 4 in the front if you want. I just noticed that 3 with the glue seems to hold everything just fine. Now we're ready to put our oak trim around the sides. Now I mock up my frame, get it tied up against my shelf, and mark where I'm going to have to cut it. Put a little glue on your cut piece. And again, we're just doing simple butt joints. So we're going to go ahead and clamp that in place and screw it in. Just make sure your 2 boards where they meet are nice and flush and that the clamp's holding it in place while you drill the hole. The plugs are going to be 3/4 inch down from the top. So I go ahead and mark my little gauge, 3/4 inch, and it's going to be 3/8 inch from the edge. That's the center of our plug. Now my 3/8 hole for my plug, the exact same way we did the top. You can see a 2-inch long drywall screw gives us plenty of gripping power. And with the hole pre-drilled, it goes in really easy. Now we're just going to flip this around and put in my second screw. So the measurements remain the same. It's 3/8 out by 3/4 inch from the top. Having a little jig like this one from Craig makes putting your marks in a lot easier. So there we go, we're 3/4 inch down, 3/8 from the top. We want these to be pretty accurate. Now we do the exact same thing for our second screw. I mark my hole with an ice pick. Drive in my second screw. Mark for my dowel cut. A little bit of glue. Here's my dowel. Get my little wooden hammer and just tap it in. This actually gives you a really strong joint, and it conceals. You're not going to see any screws when this is all said and done because everything will be covered up by plugs. And the cool thing about these plugs is we're using end grain. So what that means is the end grain is going to stain up a lot deeper and darker than the rest of the grain. So the plugs will really pop, make a nice accent to our piece. So this side is ready to go. Now all we have to do is go to the other side and do the same thing. I mock up my piece and I mark it where it's gonna be flush. I got my mark and I just cut it on my miter saw. Take it back to double check it. That looks good. So our last cut is going to be marked right here at the end. Same thing for this end. Apply a little glue. I think it was 3/4 down, so I'm going to mark my 3/8. Make sure your end piece is nice and flush. Mark the hole and drill your pilot hole. Our last 2 dowels. Just take our edge material, fit it onto our shelf. We're going to glue and nail this in place. So the last thing that I do is I just plane this down ever so slightly. This was a little bit higher than the rest of it, so just using a hand plane, I make sure that it's flush with my end pieces. That looks pretty good. So all we've done is build a basic box. Here's our box. We flip it over. This back rail is what we're going to mount to the wall, and then once it's mounted to the wall, we're going to take our top piece and put it in place, covering up all of our mounting screws. And that's it. That's all you have is just your basic box that'll sit up on the wall. Before I sand, what I'm going to do is fill any small little gaps that I have with a little bit of wood filler. I'm going to start sanding our box. We're going to start off with 80 grit, work up to 120, and then finish off with 220. In between that, we're going to do a little bit of distressing as well. This is what it looks like after sanding with 120 grit. Everything is pretty flat, pretty smooth. Our front piece is smooth with our edge. Our dowel plugs are flush with the piece as well. Now we're ready for some distressing. Our second piece is just put in for sanding purposes, but we're not attaching this piece yet because we're going to need to get to our ledger board for attaching it to the wall. So all you want to do here is when you're sanding, put it in place, sand it flush to your edges. Make sure your fit is nice and tight, but don't screw down or nail down your top piece until it's mounted to the wall. Now for our distressing, all I'm going to be using is a couple of files and some chisels. It's going to be some really light distressing. It'll add some character to the piece. So we'll start off in the corner. What I'll do is I'm going to take the file, rasp, and lightly do our corners to kind of just show a little bit of natural wear and tear. Couple chisel marks. You can use different size chisels too, that way it'll look more random. A couple little nicks here and there. Like I said, I'm going with a very, very light distressing. You can also take it to the edge. What you want to do is you want to make it look believable, not like somebody just beat the hell out of the wood for no reason. Make it look like actual wear marks where wear would tend to occur. Chisels do really well at cutting in damage. You just got to be careful that you don't go too deep, unless that's what you really want to do. So I've done my mild distressing. What I'm going to do next is just lightly sand all of the marks that I put in to make it look like it's been well worn and I don't have any type of huge blemishes in the wood, anything that feels rough. I want everything to be smooth, but just worn. So 120 everything. I also ease my edges slightly at this point, kind of blend it in to the areas that I distressed, and kind of sell that look. We're almost done sanding. We just finished with 150 grit. Now we're gonna just hand sand with 220 to finish everything off and get it ready for staining. Biggest piece of advice I can give you for any piece really is don't skip the sanding. Start off with your 80, go to 120, 150, 220. Really pay attention to the detail in the sanding step because that's gonna show in your finished product. Now I just wipe everything down with a tap cloth and get ready for the finish stage of it all. Here's everything we need for our finish. We're going to start off with a seal coat, then we're going to put a stain on, and then a top coat. Mixing up our seal coat right now, I'm using a Zinsser Bullseye Universal Sanding Sealer. I love using this stuff on raw wood because it allows me to control my stain much better. You don't need to use it, but once you do, you'll realize that staining becomes a whole lot easier. Like if there's any one tip or trick I can give people is just try a sanding sealer and you'll fall in love with your results. Foam brush is all you need to apply. You're just going to put on one coat just evenly onto the wood. Shellac dries really fast. It's only been about 2 hours and we're ready to go. Before we put on a stain, I'm going to go ahead and hit it with some 400 grit sandpaper. Typically what happens is the grain raises a little bit when you put on your first coat of sealer. So I'm going to knock all that down with a quick sanding. We're going to go ahead and apply our stain. I'm using a Mission Oak stain from Rockler. You can use any stain. This happens to be a gel stain. I just like it because of the color and the consistency of it. The way it goes on works out really well. So I'm just going to rub this on with a rag. Get it on there, let it sit for a few minutes, and then wipe off the excess. After a couple minutes, just wipe off any excess. That's all there is to staining it. It's been about 24 hours and our stain is dry. I'm going to go ahead and apply a top coat. Permalac is what I'm going to use. It's a spray-on lacquer, satin finish, works great, very easy, extremely durable. If you don't have access to Permalac, any of your polyurethanes will work. A spray-on, a wipe-on, brush-on, any of those will do the job just fine. It's literally been about 5 minutes and it's already dry to the touch, ready for a second coat. We're ready to mount our shelves. What this is a spacer board. This is the distance. It's going to be 10.5 inches between all our shelves. So I just mount this on the shelf right below it, and this way I don't have to measure. It gives me a place to actually rest my shelf while I screw it into the wall. The blue tape is where my studs are. So what I've just done is lined this template up with my shelf, and I'm going to drill 3 holes. 3 holes are going to be 3/16 of an inch to allow a 3-inch long screw to go through and go into the wall studs. Pre-drill that and we're ready to hang it. So the way that this is going to work is, this is the bottom of our shelf, this is the top. The screws are going to get run through there, and then all I do is after everything's set, this piece will mount inside here, just like that. So it conceals everything.
So all you need to do is line up the shelf with the studs, make sure everything is level, and then go ahead and screw it in place. Once everything is attached, I can put my top piece in. I'm just dropping it in place, but you can attach it with some finish nails.
Here's the way our support bracket goes together. It's 2 flanges, 2 nipples, and an elbow. And what I used was the 8-inch 3/4 nipple for my long piece. And then for my short piece, it's the 1.5-inch nipple. The floor flanges are just your standard 3/4 inch floor flange and 190-degree elbow. Put it together just like this, and this is going to be your shelf support.
The pipe supports get screwed into wall studs as well. If for some reason your studs do not line up in a symmetrical place for the brackets, use hollow wall anchors to attach them.
The pipe brackets really allow the shelves to hold a ton of weight. They come out 12 inches from the wall, and I've had these things loaded up with dishes. They're not going anywhere. If you like this project and want to see more, please subscribe to my channel.